Good evening, Madam Mayor, council members. I'm Charles Volz, 725 Vernon Way. I want to talk about high-speed rail and the proposed draft of the statements of principle. I sent to you earlier today a 3-page memo, which I hope you've had the opportunity to read. Normally, I'd apologize for putting that before you at the last minute, but in this case, it's not my fault. Unfortunately, this was not made available until Friday, and like most people, I had a very full weekend and didn't get a chance to address it until late. And I contrast that with the wonderful work being done by the Park and Rec Commission to go out and publicize an issue as important as dogs in the park, which you know I have some feelings about. And I would think that high-speed rail would at least rank equal with dogs in Washington Park in terms of the need to really let the public know what this is all about. This is the most important issue the city is facing over the last several and future decades. I'm not going to repeat much what's in the memo in the interest of time, but I do want to say that the first part of wisdom is knowing what you don't know. And what you don't know, either in terms of specific details or in reliable, honest numbers on almost every single aspect of the high-speed rail proposals and the phased implementation and the blended proposal and the electrification of Caltrain is overwhelming. The uncertainty level is so high that the rest of the state is backing off and saying, let's wait till we get some information that we can make intelligent decisions. And I'm absolutely puzzled as to why there's a need to plow forward into uncharted waters when there is so much you don't know and so much you're not going to know until later in the fall. I have recommended specific language that I believe should be added, and I'm not going to take time to discuss it here. There are 3 specific items I'd like to discuss. The first one is the basic position says we support high-speed rail, and then it's a convoluted statement where we take it away slice by slice in 20 specific conditions and qualifications. That's sort of like saying, I would support Joe Jones for Congress if he would change his position to agree with mine on 20 specific items. Who would I be kidding? So why can't we be straightforward and say, we only would support high-speed rail, or rather we don't support high-speed rail, at least this high-speed rail project, unless these conditions are met. I'm in favor of honesty and being straightforward, and I don't think we should do it backwards. Second item, what's not in our draft? One big word. It's called underground. That was our mantra for a long time. That word is not in there. No one knows why it isn't there. There's no explanation as to why. Finally, one quick item, that the high-speed rail would be consistent with the downtown plan. That's wishful thinking. We don't know that. We have no reason to believe that. I think that the statement of principles that is existing drafted is not one that the council should adopt. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. What you do now? Okay. So first I want to, Honorable Council, nice to see you. First I want to talk about the high-speed rail principles. I'm not going to reiterate anything that was said earlier, but I do want to make a comment about one of the principles in general, which is the support of this, I call it the SEG plan, Smitty and Neshu Gordon. And I know some people see that as a win, and some people also see it as the lesser of 2 evils. But I think that we should not unconditionally support the solution until we have more answers and think it through. There are consequences to all of these decisions. And when I first moved to Burlingame in 2002, we lived near the Caltrain right-of-way, and it was a wonderful place to live. And the trains stopped at Broadway and Burlingame Station, and they clanked along. And it had a great ambiance, and Burlingame really benefited from that train. Then, suddenly, the bullet train came. And it stopped going to the Broadway station. So not only do we have trains blasting through from Millbrae to San Mateo, honking their horns the whole way, we lost a station because the ridership declined. And Burlingame fought that but lost. So we lost big time in that whole scenario. When 3 years ago also Caltrain rejiggered their horns, it also amped up the noise another time, and as a result, the progress in the Caltrain corridor really has not been of benefit to Burlingame. So if we look forward, we're talking about double the trains. That'd be 175 trains a day. with high-speed rail, double the noise, whether it's from horns, steel wheels on steel rails, or the whine of electrification, double the gridlock at street crossings and high-speed trains with priority over Caltrain. That's how it's designed. And no stops for Burlingame. So once again, Burlingame loses. So I'd like to ask you to take some time to rethink the idea of even offering principles at this time. I feel like we've done a good job in the last 2 years of defining what we really need, so I'm not certain what the rush to create entirely new principles are. Next, I want to talk about the possible fire consolidation. Sometimes we think of something as good for a city, but it might not necessarily actually be good for the residents of that city. And often these things have unintended consequences. You're going to think I'm crazy. I lived near the train and the fire station, but both of those things were an issue when I moved in because the fire station, I lived near one in San Francisco. The fire station was a pleasant place that did their job. We coexisted very peacefully. And then in 2004, Hillsborough consolidated with that fire station. The noise increased in a big way. Then last year, Rollins Road consolidated into that fire station. Not only that, it's the hub of a lot of training. So when you think of noise from a fire station, most people think, oh, the sirens, big deal. But it's not just the sirens. It's the exhaust fans that have to go off every time it comes and goes. It's the testing of their equipment. It's generators. I could go on, but there are a lot of associated noise. And I want to make sure that we really think about those things before we decide that it's worth saving $500K to do a entirely different plan and potentially ruin the quality of life in Burlingame. So thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Jennifer Pfaff, followed by Mary Griffith, followed by Russ Cohen.
Jennifer Pfaff, 615 Bayswater. I also have to talk fast because I have two issues. The first one is I was completely blown away by the Davie survey. I'm just almost in tears. It was so well done. And I want to make sure that Carlene Harvey and Bob Disco and all the parks folks who regularly keep our trees looking so beautiful and make our town look beautiful are mentioned, because I hope they're watching, because they're incredible and they don't get enough credit. They're really working on a skeleton crew. I think they deserve it. I also, because she mentioned the blue gums, and we have a lot of eucalyptus actually, and some are not on El Camino. We plant them all over. It's not all the eucalyptus are on El Camino. However, we have the large blue gum. They're very important to us. They are a character-defining feature. They and the elms that still exist, and the new elms. And I wrote you, over a year ago that I was working on an enormous paper for a nomination that we are eligible for since 1999, and I'm still working on it. It's been enormously time-consuming, but I'm going to get it in there, and it's an honor that if we can get this, they're Caltrans' trees, and I'm working with them, and I hope we get it. We'll have to see, because it will be a great way for us to continue to get, I think, replacement trees. So to keep your fingers crossed, and I'll keep you informed. Now, turning on to another issue is the high-speed rail statement of principles, and I'm not going to repeat what Charles and Betsy said. They kind of took my thunder. But I just wanted to mention that words are used in there, such as mitigation and outreach. And three of you sat on the Planning Commission for long enough to know what those words really mean. And with a big mega project like this, there aren't going to be a whole lot. And I just want to say that when all these words are thrown in that haven't been, the issue of phasing and of what that actually means, and the eschew and Gordon Simidian proposal, we know so little, and they've been thrown into the mix. I just think it's very dangerous to even use the word support in this regard. Any part of the statement, support, there's just so little that we know about all these items that I think it's just dangerous, and I don't see a need at this moment to be supporting any aspect of this project. We just don't know enough. I'm also left wondering whether this document was prepared by the same city that took time to assess residents' opinions for several months last spring. 860 people responded, and the results showed overwhelming support, 74%, for the city's then current position of support only if the project was built below grade. This is the most glaring omission in the document. Additionally, 27% of those questioned did not support the project through Burlingame at all. And I wonder what has changed. Does this new position paper properly represent the opinions and desires of the Burlingame residents, or is it rather an attempt to appease our neighboring cities supportive of high-speed rail as well as Caltrain that has erred in hitching its wagon to high-speed rail? Burlingame's principles.
Could you wrap it up, please?
My last sentence. Burlingame's principles must be representative of Burlingame's interest and high standards only and no one else's. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up is Mary Griffith, followed by Russ Cohen, followed by, oh, I've got two Russ Cohen. I guess you want to talk twice. Okay. Yes.
Mary Griffith, 232 Clarendon Road. Good evening. I also want to talk to you about the statement of principles as it relates to the high-speed rail project. I reviewed the proposed statement, and I found myself wondering why my city council is moving forward with the statement of principles related to a project which, by all accounts, is fundamentally flawed. Just kind of off the cuff, the projected ridership numbers have been derided. There's no viable business plan. We all saw the most recent auditor's report. The list just goes on and on. I think by choosing to go forward with these principles, you're choosing to endorse, as Jennifer said, a project which your community hasn't yet vetted. We don't know what it's going to represent. I believe, and I've been pretty active in things related to the high-speed rail project, that a large portion of the community doesn't support this project. So I have to ask you, are you choosing not to listen to your constituents by choosing to go forward with this statement of principles? It's not consistent. We don't request an underground option. I see that as a huge flaw and a huge missed opportunity. And what are we doing advocating on behalf of Caltrain and talking about, what their losses are going to be as a result of this project happening? I don't think that's appropriate for our city to do that. They can do that for themselves. So I just want you to know that I don't support the two-track option as it's been laid out thus far. I mean, perhaps I could be persuaded with more facts, more evidence of funding. And I hope you'll take that into consideration and maybe think about stepping back and waiting until some future time where we really have a clear idea of what this project is really going to be, and quite frankly, even if it's going to go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Russ Cohen.
It's true you did. This is Russ Cohen, 605 Lexington Way. It's true you did have two cards. I was going to speak on the dog park issue, so thank you for deferring that, and I won't have to speak so fast because I want to speak about high-speed rail as well. A few months ago, I came to you and I reminded you that you didn't necessarily have to participate in CSS, which is context-sensitive solutions. That program really wasn't necessary, and you really didn't need to participate in that because you already had made a very firm, very clear, very no-nonsense statement, and you had a very clear point of view, and that was only to accept an undergrounding solution. It couldn't have been more simple, and it couldn't have been more clear. The latest statement and the statements of principles only results in obfuscating that position, and it will undoubtedly come back to haunt you and haunt this community. By reading these principles, and this is the reason why it can come back to haunt you, if you read the principles, the media and the public could easily conclude that the council supports high-speed rail. It supports only a system along the Caltrain right-of-way rather than reviewing an alternative route. It could also conclude that no schools, parks, or historic properties need protection, and that this system fits within our downtown-specific plan. So this principles list is completely unnecessary and could be even dangerous. You've already made your position clear to all the authorities, and you've already issued a statement of support for the position that local state representatives have taken. So this document serves no positive purpose. In fact, it makes no mention of your previous position regarding only accepting the underground solution, which others have mentioned. So this document is saying a lot to say nothing at all. I suggest that you simply rely on what you have already said, and that, ladies and gentlemen of the council, will speak louder than any set of vague principles will. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ted Crocker, followed by Pat Torney, followed by Dale Farrar.
Ted Crocker, 446 Marin Drive. I'm sorry to keep going with this, but I was here over a month ago saying the same thing, and I thought we had an agreement, an understanding, but apparently not. So I don't know a lot about playing poker, but I do know showing everyone your cards before others have received theirs is not a good strategy. When it comes to high-speed rail, it's very clear that no one, and I mean no one, not even the High-Speed Rail Authority, has the details needed to make an informed decision regarding route choice, design, or even feasibility. So why has Council found it necessary to come out with this high-speed rail statement of principles now? What you're proposing to turn out is a highly contradictory, confusing, and largely useless document that is trying to be all things to all parties. And forgive me because I love you all, but it reads to me like a statement coming from a stereotypical career politician and uncharacteristic of the council that I've come to know. You endorse high-speed rail in the Caltrain corridor, and yet you say other routes should be considered. When? Once you lock us in the Caltrain corridor, it isn't going to change later. You say downtown businesses along the right-of-way must not be negatively impacted during construction. That's not even possible. They will be impacted. Not only are you endorsing plans that have not been vetted in any way, you're endorsing a plan that is not consistent with the wishes of your citizens. And this has already been touched on regarding the survey back in March, where 74% of those who participated said that support should only be if it is built below grade. And yet nowhere in this document is below grade being stipulated. It's vanished. In fact, quite the opposite can be presumed. In one bullet point is stated the high-speed rail project should not create a visual or physical divide. Nothing about trenches. And this is a very ambiguous statement in my mind. Some people, an elevated structure is not a visual divide. The next bullet point goes on to recommend a future new EIR that includes consideration of different vertical alignments. That could include above-grade options. I could go on. It's pretty clear what the purpose, to me anyways, is of this document. It is to be all things to all parties except our citizens in an effort to make Burlingame sound nice and agreeable and with the program. Rationally speaking, the new high-speed rail statement of principles can only serve one purpose, and that is to please others, namely San Mateo, Millbrae, Caltrain, the High-Speed Rail Authority, and certain legislators, but all at the risk of hurting Burlingame's own well-being by potentially locking us into an ill-conceived project and design. As I said, I can't believe I'm standing here saying this all over again. I'm very frustrated. As far as I know, nothing has changed since the last time I stood up here. And therefore, in my opinion, no position should be taken before the results of the EIR lawsuit are found out. No position should be taken before the High-Speed Rail Authority's business plan and ridership numbers are released and studied. No position should be taken before the Smitty and S.U. Gordon blended plan is studied to see if it is even feasible and how it would work. Thank you.
Thank you. Pat Torney.
Good evening. Pat Journey, 1445 Balboa. Just a quick thing about the dog park. I was assuming that when it does come up, it will be a public hearing. I believe that that was what was stipulated. It won't just be recommendations that are adopted when it does finally come back. High-speed rail. At the last JPB meeting, first Thursday of the month, I asked the question of Mr. Scanlon, that being, since Caltrain and high-speed rail are joined in an MOU, Did Mr. Scanlon know what the decision was from the Attorney General's office to Mr. Van Ark's query as to whether or not a blended approach or phased implementation are even legal under the bond issue that, Proposition 1A? Mr. Scanlon reported that I was asking a question much too soon, even though a decision has been made. Nobody wants to share it. They're not going to share it until after the August release, if that's when it is, of the Caltrain Critical Analysis Study. Mr. Van Ark was also asked about this at Thursday's meeting in Bakersfield, and my ears heard Caltrain Critical Analysis. So these people are not telling us anything. We've known for years. We ask questions, outreach, this, that, the other thing. Everything that every other speaker said tonight about high-speed rail, I'll agree with. I want to ask, why are we even considering this before the EIR hearing, Atherton 1 and 2? The suits will be heard August 12th. It's a couple of weeks away. Why are we jumping preemptively, and putting the cart before the horse? Let's find out, first of all, if the program and the project EIRs, number 1, are legal. Everything was thrown open with Atherton 1. Atherton 2 is now, is it all legal? Are they moving ahead and giving us proper EIR and CEQA protections? Atherton, Menlo Park, and Palo Alto seem to think not. Belmont has put in an amicus. This city should not be doing this. It should be joining the Belmont amicus. You have until Wednesday at 4 o'clock. A couple of weeks ago, somebody told me that a check that I had written for $1,000 didn't seem to make it. So I called my bank. I'm outraged that it cost me $34 to stop payment on my own money. But it's $34 of insurance that I'm not billed out of $1,000 in case my check is somewhere lost and somebody else files it. What I'm saying is, to file an amicus is so inexpensive, and if we join Belmont, we've already cut the price. It's a small price to pay rather than putting ourselves in a position where we've just accepted, I'm not quite sure what, but we've given in. Thank you.
Thank you. Eileen? Pat Journey.
Pat Journey, 1445 Balboa. I see that on Thursday night there's going to be a special council meeting over at the Lane Room to discuss possible $5 million property purchase for new green space, i.e. the post office, that would fit very nicely into our downtown plan, ties into the Burlingame streetscape, yada, yada, yada. I'd like to go and listen to that, and I'd like to know that maybe in a few years I can sit in that green space and not be looking at a high-speed rail aerial construct, which will be visible because we are not really fighting high-speed rail tonight or tomorrow if we don't litigate. That's the only choice the state has left us. We have disagreements with above ground, can't get below ground, and every time you turn around, we're being told something else. I don't know if you people were invited to the Spanish delegation, but I was at the Fairmont. I'll do anything for a free lunch. High-speed rail sent out an invitation to come listen to Spanish rail. Of course, I was put on the wait list because this was a bogus invitation. They already had their invitees. I got that notice 5 minutes later. I plugged in saying, yes, I want to come listen and have my free lunch at the Fairmont. I was immediately put on a wait list, and I never got a ticket, and neither did any other person of the public. This was not public outreach. It was bait-and-switch scam, and that's what they're doing to us. It's all bait-and-switch. Take these principles and save the piece of paper and the ink that it's costing us to print them, and stow them until after the EIR program and a project, which are both being challenged, which is the only way that the public can now challenge this project. That's all they've left us. Take the few $1,000s that we put aside for high-speed rail. Spend it now. Join our sister city, Belmont, in their amicus. Because, you know, we did the story polls. They were going to put up permanent story polls, but they did us one better. They've gone to court. They've joined the 3 other sister cities that say, no high-speed rail on the Caltrain right away. So take that few $1,000s and spend it now. What are we waiting for? My new aerial structure that I can see from our new green space, and I hope we get the post office. I don't want the elevated structure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Good evening again. Charles Volt, 725 Vernon Way. I'd like to take advantage of this second public comment opportunity. A couple items on high-speed rail. Number one, news flash. I understand that Kirk Pringle resigned earlier. Secondly, on legislation 517-145, the word is that during the recess period, the respective staffs and perhaps the governor's office are going to be thrashing it out and getting the leadership on board so that when they resume, they'll be able to pass a bill. So now is the time to weigh in if you're going to do so. But what I'm really here to do is that I'm now in constructive problem-solving mode with respect to high-speed rail, and I'll cut to the bottom line. I'm going to suggest that you establish a rail committee like 4 of the 6 other PCC cities do. Only Burlingame and Brisbane do not have one. The other 4 do. They vary considerably in how they're composed and what they do, but it has proven to be an effective way of combining the resources the city has to address the problems. At the outset, I want to make it clear that I have no personal interest in this. I've already given the General Sherman statement. If nominated, I will not run. If elected, I will not serve. But I want to give an overview, which is for a Burlingame-sized city, you are not built to handle a problem like high-speed rail. You've got your hands full with all the things you've already discussed tonight, all the planning issues, all the downtown revitalization, et cetera. And the high-speed rail problem is so large and complex that you're just not built structurally to handle it. Furthermore, the center of gravity keeps changing. You think you're just about getting on top of the problem, and suddenly it has a new dimension and a different problem. You individually, as council people, don't have the time that's needed to stay on top. Your staff doesn't have the time. And there are potential values to the city of such a committee, depending on what you want and how you structure it. The first one is it can be an information filter to deal with the fire hose of information that you get. You don't know what's reliable and what isn't, and you get some well-informed people, and they can put some things together for you that normally staff would do, but staff doesn't have time. Secondly, it can be a study group. They can research and report back to you on particular technical items. I'll give one example. Diesel multiple units, is that a good alternative for Caltrain if high-speed rail doesn't come up the corridor? There are people that can find out about that and report back. I could mention half a dozen other ones, but time doesn't permit. And finally, it can provide a feedback group to you. And I want to say that what happened tonight was an example of we're not working effectively together, and this could have been prevented. You didn't hear anything tonight that you shouldn't have heard a week or 2 ago if we'd been working together. We need to work together, and this could be a constructive way to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Anyone else? Okay. We'll close the public comment, and we're on to old business. Item 12A on the cell phone usage guidelines, as we talked about, we are going to defer consideration of that until August 15th, our next meeting. That brings us to 12B, consideration of high-speed rail principles. And we've had a lot of dialogue on this already. I just want to say the simple goal of these principles was to put on paper something that could be a guiding policy for the council members, especially those who are going to different meetings talking about high-speed rail issues, so that we all know where we stand and we can defer to these principles when we are trying to make statements on behalf of the city. We are saying in here, basically, this is backing up the letter that we just sent, which says that we have endorsed the idea of using only the 2 tracks for Caltrain. The thought is that if this proposal were expanded to 4 tracks or just beyond 2 tracks, what we are calling for is a completely new EIR. So this is tougher than the FSHU, Smidian, Gordon proposal in that it has some more statements as to how far this proposal could go. And I think the only reason to talk about this is practicality. We're talking about a proposal for saving Caltrain at this point, that it could be rescued with the high-speed rail dollars if, in effect, the current baby bullet runs are turned into high-speed rail runs. And we say specifically that we would not accept a huge number of those runs. We would consider that to be a very limited scope. But if we are going to be talking about an expanded project, I, for one, would insist that we have a completely new EIR, open up the process to different alignments, different locations, and certainly 4 tracks doesn't make sense above ground to me in any form. I think it would need to be below ground. So I'll lead off with that and ask the council for their input. Vice Mayor Deal.
Well, I've been making notes like crazy on top of the notes I made before.
Okay.
I would say that if somebody on the council wants to use this as their principles, they're more than welcome to do that. I'm not going to support that as my principles, and I'll explain the reason why. I have a problem with it. It just simply says high-speed rail projects should not create a visual or physical divide through Burlingame. That's a matter of opinion. You're going to find people who are going to find examples of a raised rail that I think is visually attractive. I think it was, who was it that said that in the audience tonight? I've forgotten. The other one, I think it specifically, for me, would have to say a cut and cover. It doesn't specifically say that. The other thing I noticed on this, and there's a lot of things I did notice, and I apologize that I did not get back early enough on this. I had a lot to do, and I didn't study this as well as I should have, so you're hearing more of it tonight. One thing, for instance, all project impacts must be mitigated, and one of the mitigations must be the eucalyptus grove along the Caltrain corridor. Okay, I agree. But I've been on the Planning Commission for many years. A mitigation to the trees is small trees. If we're going to tear them down, we're going to plant some small trees. So we just, in effect, said there that we will accept the fact that they can tear down the eucalyptus trees because they've got a mitigation that they're going to give you, and that is, we're going to plant some new ones. So we will have a row of small trees there. I think there's a lot of things in here, and I just have to make it clear for myself on some of this stuff. I mean, I've listened to this when it began at high-speed rail, Prop 1A that passed 52.6% of the population on a very flimsy addressed ballot measure. And as they say, the devil's in the details.
Actually, illegally stated ballot measure, it turns out.
Okay. That's a star to my note then. As they say, the devil's in the details. Well, we didn't get any details, but boy, we sure got the devil. Then the idea was, let's go with phased implementation. And all the while, I was on the technical working group and on the PCC and listening to this change. Every meeting, we got a different story trying to placate us. You know, it was going to be context-sensitive solutions. Well, that was a farce. They were just trying to railroad us, so to speak. Not trying to make a pun, but railroad us into their own position. So High-speed rail, yes, exactly. So then it was phase implementation. Now it's blended approach. It's the same thing. They're not giving us any details. And once again, the devil is in the details. And we've got the devil again. And they're trying to make us happy with this. Now, I am happy about a few things. A 4-track system was never going to work. If, and once again, it's if. And I think you always have to have a plan A and a plan B. And a plan B, if we've got to have high-speed rail, then it's got to be in a cut and cover, and it's got to be a 2-track system, which is going to save property values. It's going to save, it's going to be a lot less expensive to build. And if South San Francisco wants to have an elevated 4-track system, I'm happy for them. But it's not for Burlingame. And I know we've heard so much negatives about this. The auditor's report, the traffic study that we saw, not the traffic study, the
Ridership study.
Thank you, everybody. All of those. There's so much stuff. There's a bunch of bull coming out, and it gets a little tiresome. Now, as people know, I just was appointed to the Caltrain board, which has an MOU, of course, with high-speed rail. Now, I've already had many conversations going back several months with the CEO, Mike Scanlon, about that, and with Mark Simon about that, too. I'm not for it, and I think they know that. And I think the first time I ran for that position, that's the reason I lost, because they thought, oh, my gosh, this guy's against high-speed rail. I'm not against high-speed rail. It's not my plan. It's their plan. They screwed it up. I didn't do anything. But listen to their argument. And so if high-speed rail were to go through, it would have to be a cut and cover. It would have to be 2-track only. And then additionally, my big fear about high-speed rail is the cost. And the cost is so high and so dramatic that it's going to absorb all the money, transportation money, that this state is going to have for now and for a long time. And then we're going to be saddled with the fact that we are never going to get that east-west connection. One of the most valuable aspects of transportation in the Bay Area is once you get to that station, how do you get away from it? Yeah, now Caltrain is doing pretty good with the bicycle program. They've got, and Pat's going to correct this number, but it was 3,600 bikes a day? Bikes a day, taking Caltrain. So that's pretty good. But you're not going to get 100,000 people taking their bicycle on Caltrain. It's just not going to work. I just imagine this big long line with a rope connecting them all together. So there's so many things that aren't going to work. This Bay Area needs a transportation system. And the existing Caltrain is not it. It's a boutique system. And so we need to have something different. And tying ourselves to high-speed rail and hoping that they're going to get all this money so we can electrify, I think is the wrong way to go. I think Caltrain needs to go on their own and figure out where they're going to get this money and develop a transportation system up this corridor and have enough money left over for an east-west connection and a shuttle system instead of a high-speed rail that's not even going to stop in Burlingame. It's going to whiz right by Burlingame, even if it isn't a cut and cover.
Right.
So I just don't see any benefit for us. I just see negatives. So,
Right. So,
I think I'm done.
okay.
And I mean, after receiving all these letters, and I feel at fault here because I usually keep on top of everything. And I mean, the first mistake was not involving our citizenry who know way more about high-speed rail than any of us. And when we first,
We know too much.
not as much as Mr. Volt. Yeah. We know too much. That's why we won't go away.
Too much, too little.
When we came up with our initial principles, and I think that was 18 months ago in the town hall format, and as I explained to people, things have changed since then. There were things that we said in that document that are no longer true, and that's why I think it's worthy to update or change them. However, I think us in a vacuum up here doing it is wrong, because I think what we did the first time is we brought everybody in and came to consensus as a community. Since that time, we've had, I think Jennifer quoted the survey, which at March was 867. It's almost tickling 1,000 at this point. People are still filling it out 6 months later. It was very clear that they agreed with our position that we made 18 months ago, that we support it only if it's underground. And as everyone has pointed out, that's not even in our new document. And so I think because we're down here in the weeds all the time, it's what Charles is saying. You know, we can't come up for the big picture. And that's, again, reminds me, that's what our public needs to do to keep us on the right page. And when we, you know, we went on vacation and we did this. And so I would say, I think there's a lot of things that need to be said in a new document. I think it's really important that the people on the ground are part of making that document if we're going to change it after 18 months. You know, I think we need to do it the right way. And I think some of the advice about let's wait till October and see all this new information that's going to come is a worthy one. So I don't see anything that's radically changed that we can't go out and use the old document and stand by it, other than CSS has long died, and I can't remember the other items. So I think it's really important for credibility and to get the best document that we're not doing it up here or doing it through email or whatever. I think we need to sit around a table, and I'm happy. I don't know if it's a rail committee. I think that's a great thing, a great piece of advice. I think we're kind of feeling at this point that we can rest a bit for the next battle because they're not looking at us right now. So I don't know. My mind can be changed on that. But I think it's a conversation worth having at this point. But in any effect, I think it's very obvious who the rail people are in our community. It's easy enough to bring them in as part of this process. We've done that before. You know, Terry and I have met with them before. You know, I just let the ball drop. I went to Tahoe for a week and wasn't thinking about my public. I'm sorry. But that would be my druthers, is to just get it right, involve the community in a format that's not this format like we did before, because this doesn't work, and talk about what our real goals are, because we're conflicted. We're all conflicted. I mean, if I had my say, I'd say I'm opposed to high-speed rail. I mean, if anyone asks me, but that's not this council's position. But maybe if we sat down and had a long meeting about it, you know, maybe that's where we're headed. And I think the rest of the state has come to where we've been, finally. And the articles, I had sent you an email. There was a cover story in the Examiner on Sunday. And first of all, they're building their Trans-Bay terminal that won't have a train going to it. So they're feeling they're going to waste all that money. But then on the back page, it said, San Mateo County outmaneuvers San Francisco on high-speed rail. And it talked about how engaged our community is and our politicians, and how we have, essentially, San Francisco has not defended their position on it. And from what they're saying, they don't have the bandwidth. I think they're busy with, I'm not going to say circumcision, some of those other important things in their city. But the head of SPUR, which is the Research Transportation Institute, just said that don't let the perfect get in the way of the good, and he's seeing the writing on the wall that there's not going to be a 4-track train coming up the peninsula. And what Semidian is proposing is a more practical point of view. Now, there are members of our community that still say, you know, he's got it wrong, or blended is just another word for what they're saying. So I think that's maybe not true analysis, but it is interesting. I think we have managed to be somewhat cohesive in our message, and it's resonating with people that there's really big problems with what they're proposing on, you know, just not in Little Burlingame, but on a very wide level. So it might be time to have a powwow with our community again and see where we are, and, you know.
Just a question for both of you and also the rest of the council. You know, we supported the Semidian issue proposal, which if you support that proposal, you're supporting the 2 tracks as they exist and no longer are saying it can only be in a trench. So that's, you know, I don't see how do you rationalize supporting that proposal and then saying that.
Because
I want to make comments. Okay.
Should we?
Yeah, go first and then you can go.
Okay. As far as the 2-track, The reality is if we have a two-track system at grade and Caltrain does the number of trains that they would like to, let's say let's just get high-speed rail out of this. If they do the amount of trains that they want to do, there's going to have to be a grade separation, period. Okay, so let's stop kidding around and pretending that there's going to be this boutique railroad running up and down the peninsula with 80 trains a month. That's not what's going to happen unless everything fails. Okay, if everything fails, then yes, we will add this little boutique railroad. It'll be like something out of Disneyland. It'll run up and down the peninsula, and it won't be a transportation system. And they'll start building all these transportation centers around that railroad, and it'll be useless.
They are talking about grade separation, so in the Caltrain proposal, that is part of what the money would be used for. So that's
right. So you have to grade separate. To accept the two tracks at grade, it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
So it's going to have to be cut and cover or something like that.
Okay. Councilman Keegren, I think, was next.
At the last council meeting, I actually had stated publicly I had concerns with these principles. And one of them was that I didn't see a cut and cover. And I also see this as compromising just to save Caltrain. I want Caltrain to work, and I think it needs to be electrified. And grade separations would be a benefit to the city, but not on behalf of partnering with high-speed rail. I don't think it's our job to bail Caltrain out by partnering with high-speed rail. We go one direction, we think we have it set, and then we're derailed to another direction. We think that's set, we're derailed again. This has become a game of Monopoly. And I am tired of playing it. And unfortunately, when this came out in an email, I was in Tennessee. I had read it and did call the mayor, telling her my concerns, because I still didn't support it, but unfortunately it had already been mailed. So
that was the letter. That was the letter.
The letter, right. But I still wanted it to be known that I still did not agree with this. And it's vague, even though I may know the intentions, because we know this information so well, but for the average reader that's looking at this, it's vague, not create a visual or physical divide. Well, how do you define that? You know, it's not defined. We don't even know what they're going to even show us. We're supporting something without actually seeing a project. So I think we're jumping the gun. Is there some good value in on these principles? There are some, yes. But there are many things here that I don't necessarily agree with. And to me, these principles just jump the gun. I think we need to sit back a little bit and wait until we get more information and see what high-speed rail is going to do. And also, Caltrain got themselves in this position. It's not our job to bail them out, even though we want the system to improve. And, you know, sometimes you have to hit rock bottom first before you realize, you know what, we messed up, but, you know, let's start a new slate and see how we can do this correctly, because we are in desperate need of transportation that works. But it needs to be transportation that benefits our community. And at this point, I'm not seeing the benefits of high-speed rail. And when we're looking at revitalizing our downtown and looking at, you know, the streetscape, improving that, high-speed rail could possibly take all that away. And after all the hard work we've put into this, and, you know, 2 council members that have been able to get a grant to help out with this, all that work is just poof. Should we be close to a transportation corridor? Absolutely. That will revitalize our downtown. But we have to have the right transportation in order to do that. And this combination, to me, at grade, does not sit well. And I would rather see it cut and cover or completely trenched, which I know that's more than likely not going to be a possibility. So for me, the compromise is the cut and cover. And that's not even mentioned in here.
Councilman Brannery.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to propose, just in terms of driving to action, that we penned any principles. There are lots of good reasons, and I don't need to repeat them, but at the very least, waiting for the Caltrain analysis of whether 2 tracks is even feasible makes a lot of sense. So I would like to propose that we simply pen these. I do want to answer the mayor's question with respect to the support for Simidian et al., because I don't believe the two are in contradiction to pen this set of, first of all, the letter very clearly, I think, and with very clearly raised questions about the underlying value proposition of high-speed rail, whether you need it, whether it can pay for itself, and all of the general issues that many of us have about the project. On the other hand, I think we have to be mindful that if high-speed rail forges ahead and forces us with an EIR that examines 4 tracks above grade, the city is going to spend tens of thousands and maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars in wasted engineering analysis and noise analysis and vibration analysis. And all of that can be prevented if the Simidian proposal of 2 tracks maximum at grade maximum gets adopted. So for me, I support the Simidian initiative precisely because it would put high-speed rail in a very ironclad box and would therefore save us both time and money. And for those reasons, I think with respect to high-speed rail, that's the right way to approach. Whether we need to have principles to talk about any of that, I'm really not sure. I mean, I don't hear a lot of value to the principles, and I hear a lot of people who are concerned about them. So to me, that's a pretty easy cost-benefit. You know, I just say we'll put them on the shelf, and if it seems useful to have a revised set of principles in the future, then at that point they can be pulled off. So that would be my recommendation for where we are right now.
Well, I was going to go one step further and say we postpone consideration of any principles until after the Attorney General's decision comes out, because that will rule whether it is legal, in fact, to use the Caltrain corridor at all and under Proposition 1A. So
I'm sorry, Madam Mayor, if I could just say one other. I think very clearly from comments from council members and comments from the council or from the public that any statement of principles needs to make it clear that there are some principles that affect if you only do it in 2 tracks and other principles that apply if you do it in 4 tracks. And I think the fact that we didn't make that, or these set of principles don't make that distinction, caused a lot of problems. So any set in the future, I think, pretty clearly needs to make that distinction.
yeah, and I think some of the confusion is that some of these came from an earlier document that we approved, like shall not create a visual or physical divide. We just picked that up verbatim. The mitigation stuff, we picked that up verbatim from an earlier document, and putting it into the new one didn't blend very well. So I am going to suggest that we take no action. If someone else would like to take a crack at writing some principles after these latest things, there's never going to, there is a possibility the whole thing will fall apart because of its shaky business plan and ridership stuff. But in the absence of knowing for sure what's going to happen with high-speed rail, I think we have to be very vigilant, stay at the table, and continue to lobby for the least harmful thing that we can imagine to happen in our community. So we will continue to do that. So I think that's all for high-speed rail. And now, does anyone have any other